The multiverse, one of the most interesting concepts in science fiction. The possibility of having multiple outcomes, infinite futures, and alternate realities. These things tend to have drastic impacts on whatever story dares to implement them, and Boruto is no different. You see, chapter 13 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex introduced the concept of multiple timelines, which stems from Kashin Koji's ability to see all possible futures. Now, the name of this ability is prescience, which is by definition the fact of knowing something in advance, thus having foreknowledge. This simply means that Koji is able to see all possible timelines that can materialize from the actions taken in present time. Now, some have used this to imply that Boruto has an actual multiverse, which isn't necessarily true. In fact, multiple statements from Koji himself outright confirms that this isn't the case. So, in this video, I'll explain what Koji's ability is, how it works, and why Boruto has multiple timelines instead of an active multiverse. Now, in chapter 13, Koji confirms that he is in fact affected by Ada's omnipotence, which means that inside his head, Boruto is Ishiki's vessel, the one who fled from Kara. He then went on to clarify that even though his memories have been altered, he is aware of the fact that Boruto is indeed the son of the Hokage as well. This is because he knew about this possible future long before it even happened. You see, Koji later reveals in this chapter that along with Ada and Daemon, each member of Kara were modified with the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki. And while Ada, Daemon, and Code received Shinjutsu abilities in the form of Reflection, Omnipotence, and Space-Time Claw Marks, Boro, Koji, and Delta weren't so lucky. Instead, they only received an increase to their power, but were still inferior to the other cyborgs. This changed when Koji was on his deathbed, overwhelmed by Ishiki's extraordinary power. That is when he awakened the Shinjutsu known as Prescience, which originally belonged to Shibai Otsutsuki himself. It allowed him to see infinite possible futures in the form of strips of film. They tell the story of Baryon Mode versus Ishiki, Boruto versus Kawaki, and even Code creating the Claw Grimes by shrinking the body of the Ten Tails. Now, these are things that happened in this timeline, but he also mentions other possibilities that didn't materialize, such as a timeline in which Naruto dies in the battle versus Ishiki. He then resurrects in Kawaki's body, which leads to the destruction of the planet using his divine tree. There's also another possible future in which Ishiki is defeated, but Kawaki goes on to kill Boruto and Sarada atop the Hokage monument, which leads to Code feeding Kawaki to the Ten Tails, thus resulting in the world being destroyed once again. So as opposed to one of the futures he saw that became the current timeline, you also have other timelines that didn't manifest. That's because the future isn't one straight path. Many narratives get snuffed out based on which branch of each multifold crossroad is taken. It's a battle royale between destinies, so to speak. Now, this might lead people to believe that Boruto now has a multiverse since you have multiple versions of the timeline, but that isn't actually the case. You see, multiple timelines as a concept typically refers to different versions of events or realities that branch off from a single point of divergence within the same universe. Each timeline represents a different outcome of a particular event. An example of this would be a scenario in which a character decides to go left instead of right. In one timeline they went left, and in another they went right. Both timelines do exist, but they are variations of the same universe. Now, when it comes to a multiverse, that suggests the existence of multiple separate universes. These universes can have completely different laws of physics, different dimensions, and entirely different realities. Each universe within a multiverse can be independent of the others. So one universe might have different physical constants where life never evolved. Another could be a mirror image of our own universe, while another one might be an entirely different universe with unique elements and rules. So functionally, a multiverse and a timeline are two different things. So while multiple timelines can be considered a part of a larger multiverse, multiple timelines don't necessarily imply a multiverse. They could simply be different branches of a single universe. Conversely, a multiverse doesn't have to involve timelines. It could involve entirely different, unrelated universes. Now, you can also have different types of timelines, and the most popular one would be an alternate timeline. This happens when a character travels back in time and makes changes to the past, thus creating different branching realities, each with its own set of events and outcomes. This theory suggests that every decision or action taken creates a new timeline, resulting in a multiverse of parallel universes. This is the logic used in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is why changes they made to the past wouldn't affect their future. but instead create a new timeline where those changes occurred. That is why there's so much confusion about whether Boruto has a multiverse, because everyone is using the logic established in the MCU. So if Koji is seeing infinite possibilities, that must then mean that there must be infinite alternate timelines, which would establish a multiverse of parallel universes. Now of course this isn't the case, and it goes back to what was established in Boruto's time slip arc. You see, after traveling to the past with Sasuke, Boruto bumps into someone holding a piece of paper. And after the collision, Boruto speaks about the Thunder Train while walking away, which the unknown fellow overheard. This guy is then revealed to be the father of Denki. He would then later become the president of the company which produces the Thunder Trains. And this creation is something he attributes to something he heard from a kid over 15 years ago, which would be Boruto who traveled to the past. This means that the rules of time travel and timelines work very differently in Boruto than they do in the MCU. Instead of creating alternate timelines, changes to the past actually changes the future of the current timeline. So think about the movie Back to the Future or the Flashpoint storyline, where the Flash erases the original timeline by saving his mother's life, or the countless other times he was used to reboot the DC continuity. So what I'm saying is that timelines and time travel work differently based on who is writing the story. But Boruto's use of these concepts more so align with DC's interpretation more than the MCU. That is why when Koji mentions that Boruto will be killed by Jura, he further went on to clarify that it isn't an absolute thing, but many futures show it happening. Obviously this must not come to pass. We can't let this worst case become reality. As I mentioned before, there are infinite possibilities, and through you learning about this now, in the present, our future has already started to change one tick at a time. So this for one confirms that you are able to change the future outcomes of Boruto's timelines, but it also confirms that the future Koji saw aren't existing realities, but instead possible future realities. That is why he goes on to say that they can't let the worst case become reality, which simply means that they aren't separate universes, but instead possible outcomes. Now the reason why I mention this is because I've seen some arguments saying that since he's able to see these timelines, that must mean that there exist in realities that one could even travel to using Flying Thunder God. Now this would be possible if Boruto had an actual multiverse where every possible alternate timeline is real, and they all happen in an ever larger, ever branching way, where every possible story happens. Though if this was the case, Boruto would be stuck living out just one of the infinite timelines available to him. He wouldn't be able to decide which direction in the multiverse his universe goes in. That's not how the multiverse works. This would be similar to the Infinite Earths concept in DC, where there is an actual multiverse that has different versions of these characters existing at the same time. This is different from the multiple timelines that also exist within each universe, which is why when the Flash changes the timeline in his universe, it doesn't affect the other universes. Now to take this back to Boruto, Kashin Koji explains that there's no timeline paradox, since he's only relaying what he saw. It's a standard procedure of prescience. By the way, a timeline paradox is the contradiction of cause and effect within a timeline that results from traveling back in time. The reason why there isn't a timeline paradox in this case is because these futures are just possible realities that haven't manifested as yet, thus supporting my original point. Now we've already seen 3 separate timelines / future possibilities at play in Boruto. First, we have the original timeline where Momoshiki saw Boruto losing everything, and he was able to gain control of his body. Then we have the second timeline where Boruto didn't lose everything, mainly due to Sarada sending Sasuke to protect him, which is the current timeline. Then we also have a third possible timeline, which is what Boruto saw in chapter 75, where it depicted Kawaki standing over someone with blood splattered on his face. In this timeline, Kawaki actually succeeded in killing Boruto. So to put everything in line so it makes sense, Momoshiki initially saw a timeline where he won in chapter 80 of the original manga, but we know that wasn't going to last based on the events of the time skip timeline we saw in chapter 1. So even in the original timeline, Boruto eventually regained control of his body. And I believe that this scene is a part of the original timeline for one specific reason, which is the fact that Boruto doesn't have the black marking on his chest. Now the reason why I know this isn't the case, even though we didn't see his chest in the preview itself, is because he doesn't have the extended piece on his neck. As you can see, Boruto post-resurrection has 3 black markings on his neck when the Karma Steel is active. and one of them remains active when the karma seal isn't active. Yet in this scene, Boruto only has 2 markings on his neck, not 3. Now you could just say that it's a design change and we shouldn't look deep into it, but when you have supplementary evidence of this change being deliberate, you shouldn't ignore it. So what all of this could mean is that in the original timeline, Boruto didn't suffer through the events of chapter 67, where he had to be revived by Momoshiki, which could mean that in the original timeline, Boruto was able to suppress Momoshiki after the fight with Code. He then went on to lose everything in chapter 80 but regained it later on, thus him not having the karma mark on his neck. So what this also means is that the timeline where Boruto gets stabbed by Kawaki is already a snuffed out narrative. The future has already been changed. So this second timeline in which Boruto saw in chapter 75, where he peered into Kawaki's future, all of those events were supposed to happen to Kawaki, not Boruto, mainly because all of this took place after Kawaki succeeded in killing Boruto atop the Akage monument as Koji predicted. That is why the scenes with the Jonins is something Kawaki experienced. It's his future, not Boruto's. Now, as I said before, there was a third possible future timeline since the future was altered once again. That is why this scene with Kawaki didn't take place. It isn't a plot hole or just a design change. The future itself changed. You see, I believe that this second change happened when Kawaki was about to strike Boruto in chapter 79. Boruto was dead to rights and wide open. He was about to die. That is when Kawaki would have activated his horn state to show his full descent or to finish him off. Either way, this all changed when Sarada intervened. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in this timeline. Now this is crazy because Toneri mentioned that Boruto's true enemy will be fate itself, and this is mentioned by Juro as well in chapter 4 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex. So it could be the case that the one who helps Boruto to avert his dark future is Sarada, the one who conveniently shows up when shit hits the fan, as seen atop the Akage monument or when she asks Sasuke to save him. It might actually be the case that these theories about Sarada having the power to change fate itself is indeed true. Or it could actually be the case that what saves Boruto from his dark future is the Jogan, which Toneri refers to as the Star of Hope. By the way, this all goes back to chapter 1 where Boruto said, "I guess this is the only possible outcome." This implies that Boruto tried to prevent this from happening, but it happened anyway, which means that Boruto later becomes aware of this fate as well. It also ties into Boruto knowing about the true horrors of the Ten Tails and the dark future he's trying to prevent. It all goes back to his enemy being fate itself. With that said guys, let me know your thoughts on it. Do you think this makes sense? Do you think Boruto has multiple timelines and not a multiverse? Or do you still think it's a multiverse for some reason? And if you do, let me know in the comment section and we can discuss it. But I can assure you that Boruto does not have a multiverse. It has future possibilities that can be referred to as timelines, as there are different types of timelines. So you have parallel universes, as I mentioned in this video, you have divergent timelines, and you also have branching points. So Boruto's use of timelines isn't similar to the MCU, and it definitely isn't similar to what happened in the recent Flash movie. It really keeps it simple and uses the original concept of time travel and timelines that was established over a century ago. So some people might try to overcomplicate it to make it sound complex, but it really isn't. With that said, let me know your thoughts down below, drop a like if you like the video, and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.